we might as well just start talking about the first one in the series, which is Gremlins 1.
Why not? Shall I do that?
Yes, you should.
Excellent. I like doing what I'm told. What present do you get the child whose father thinks he has invented just about everything? In the case of patent botherer come travelling salesman Randall Peltzer, you take a detour through Chinatown and come home with a hitherto unidentified creature called a mogwai. Basically, a biologically functional kid's plush with the cute dialed up to 11, a mogwai seems the ideal family pet. Placid, cuddly, and on the face of it, pretty low maintenance. As Randall gifts the creature, now named Gizmo, to his son Billy, Galligan, he does, however, have a set of rules by which the young lad must abide. Bright light is debilitating and sunlight can be fatal. They don't react well to water, and you must never, ever, under any circumstance, feed them after midnight. Unless, of course, you want a plot to happen, in which case, have at it, mate. It's not long before Billy inadvertently breaks two of those rules, and Gizmo first multiplies into an assortment of deranged clones which then themselves mutate into a murderous menace, the likes of which the sleepy town of Kingston Falls is entirely unprepared for. Small town stereotypes inevitably fall foul of the Gremlin army, whose amusingly anarchic endeavours see them dispatch the townsfolk in a multitude of inventive ways, all the while having a whale of a time as they manifest their brand of madness in a mode somewhere between Halloween's Michael Myers and the cast of Jackass. Indeed, the most fun is to be had spending time with the Gremlins, rather than any of their human castmates, or Gizmo for that matter, which makes them either the movie's best asset or its biggest problem, depending on how you look at it. If you've somehow avoided Gremlins so far in your life, I defy you not to have a whale of a time as we watch Leader Stripe and his cohorts trash bars, run snowplows through houses, and launch old ladies out of top-floor windows at the end of turbo-enabled stairlifts. If you're expecting the same level of If you're expecting the same level of engagement within the human cast as they make their way enthusiastically, yet ever so slightly workmanlike through Chris Columbus's script, well, it ain't going to happen. Not that I suggest Zach Galligan be the one to lay waste to a cinema or attempt to strangle a dog with a string of fairy lights. We'll leave that up to Garmin. But you get where I'm going with this.
There's an inside joke and then some.
Deep cut for... Well, it's not even a deep cut. Harking from... It's more of a...
If anything, it's a shallow cut at this point.
If you weren't in the room with one of the three of us in the last 10 minutes...
It's barely even a razor burn at this point.
Yes, the odds are... Oh dear. Harking from a time where Eastern motifs in popular culture were convenient shorthand for, quote, mystery and intrigue, unquote. The quantum of their day, if you will. Gremlins is an odd film to revisit now. Having set the box office alight and captured the hearts and imaginations of a generation with its blend of, how is this PG? Violence and screwball antics, a quick demisting of the nostalgia goggles reveals a family film that's not really suitable for the family, a horror film that's not really horrifying, and an overall package which is all right, I guess. Then again, I say the same about a lot of films from this period, most notably this movie's 1984 stablemate Ghostbusters, and enough people disagree with me on that one to suggest I may be entirely incorrect, if not a misogynist. Very much a product of its time, Gremlins perhaps benefits most from remaining comfortably in the memory rather than being subject to any kind of rigorous review in hindsight. And, yes, it is always midnight somewhere.
Yes, I do disagree with you a bit, Craig. Not on Ghostbusters, which I have mentioned on this podcast several times, was fine and still is fine. Gremlins, I always liked a great deal more. I still like Gremlins a great deal. It's, to be honest, I find it more horrifying than almost any actual horror I've ever seen, but that's not quite the praise for it that you might otherwise think. There are certainly horrifying moments, like a gremlin's head roasting slowly on a fire, or the ending where the lead gremlin melts in the most disgusting manner. I just think it's fun. It's one of only 2 or 3 things that Chris Columbus has been involved with that's been any good at all. So, it's got rarity value. I love Gremlins. I love the anarchy of it. I don't particularly disagree with you that the humans in it are fairly anodyne.
They're kind of superfluous to the movie's purpose.
Yeah, they're serviceable enough for what they need to do. I don't have any particular criticism of them. But I just find Gremlins fun. The Gremlin Rag, Jerry Goldsmith's theme for this, is one of my favourite movie themes ever. I just find it really fun.
What's it called? The Gremlin Rag?
Yes.
That's fantastic.
I really like that bit of music. I think it's just so much fun, and some bits of this just really tickle me, like the carol singers being gremlins. Maybe one of my favourite scenes in film ever. and the moment shortly after it that Juve Evans that had me laughing just with you mentioning it with the old biddy going flying out of a top story window on the end of a chairlift.
That still packs a punch. There's no denying that still packs a punch even now.
Yeah. I just think this is a real classic. I don't have much to add to what you said other than that I just enjoy it a great deal more, I suspect. There are 1 or 2 issues I have with it, like for instance what you mentioned to do, Craig, the whole sort of Oriental mysticism thing. But it's
such were the 80s, eh?
There's not a lot of it. It's hardly Big Trouble in Little China or anything. It's kind of bookends it. And there's a voice over the start for some reason. It doesn't bother me as much as many, but I don't know why it's there. It's setting up a story that it immediately goes on to set up anyway.
Yeah, it's not the theatrical release of Blade Runner, is it? But it does stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, so I'm just wonder why it's there, because it's not necessarily you understand everything within the next minute or 2 anyway. Yeah, beyond that, man, I just appreciate, it's kind of surprising coming from a Chris Columbus script, to be honest. I think Joe Dante, the director, maybe had a great deal more influence on it, but it's just, everything's so solidly set up in the script and so much of it pays off. Even something as simple as the film basically has Chekhov's swords literally hanging on the wall. But the film shows them in a way that it sort of draws attention without it being ridiculous, so you don't suddenly wonder later on, where did a sword come from? But at the same time, the way it's introduced kind of gives you an idea about how things are in that house and the sort of slightly shabby state of repair it's in because of Rand Peltzer being otherwise occupied and stuff. There are bits like that, like basic mechanics of the script, that I think are done really well, and the rest of it I just think is incredible fun.
Yeah, I'm probably more on Drew's side with this, although ultimately it's not a film that I've thought about in a good long while, actually. I saw this donkeys ago, never really come back to it, so I don't know if I was surprised to find it to be just as much fun as I remembered it being, 20, 30 years ago, whenever it was that I last saw this. It's just a lot of fun. Agree with all that you're saying. I really like the design of the Gremlins. I think that's really this movie's trump card. They all just look great, and they're just visually interesting little creatures, much more than the Furby-esque Mogwai itself. And yeah, their hijinks is just an incredible amount of fun. Repeating old ground as well. Yes, the soundtrack's incredible. Very hard not to be humming that for the next couple of days after to watch that. Chris Columbus. Now here's an odd one, because this might be the only Chris Columbus thing that's any good at all, and it has elements, and I think it must be more from Joe Dante's script. Obviously, we're going on to talk about Gremlins 2, which has all the meta of it, and I've seen some reviews where it kind of ties that back into it kind of starting in this film with things like the whole Chinese mysticism thing being played up as though it's a bit of a trope, and there's lots of I can kind of see where it's coming from that, but I suspect it didn't come from Chris Columbus. I'm pretty sure it came from Joe Dante, because Chris Columbus is not someone who's proven to be of any good whatsoever with anything else that he's written, so probably more the director's influence than the writer's there, I would suspect. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of fun, and yes, very well worth looking at if you haven't done so already. But yes, How it's a PG, I don't know. But yes, it's a lot of fun.
Well, it's not anymore. It's been reclassified as a 15 now, which makes a bit more sense. In a sort of in a Temple of Doom kind of way. I think. Oh, I can't remember. Was this? I know Temple of Doom was the sort of precursor to PG-13, but I don't know if this was part of that conversation as well. Am I right, or am I imagining
It was,
that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think I just wrestle with who is this film actually for these days. It's not that it's not a great deal of fun. Like I do agree with you guys. It is still immense fun. I'm just not entirely sure why it is I'm rooting for the murderous bad guys.
Because they're funny while they're being murderous bad guys. That's the thing.
True. I think I watched the Gremlins behave, especially in the scene where they're basically trashing the bar and like shooting each other and doing all kinds of like crazy shit. And I think to myself, this is probably how we ought to behave around about the time of the inevitable end of civilization, which I'm pegging at about
June?
Well, I don't know. No, I'm not a pessimist like you, Drew. I'd say July.
Oh.
I'm going to give us a month extra. I like to think I would behave that way eventually, but yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's a real sense of discord around this film. I'm maybe just overthinking it. It's there just to be enjoyed, and if you can get on board with the notion of rooting for the bad guy, then yeah, the Gremlins in this movie are having a lot of fun. I'd also convinced myself that this was a Jim Henson joint when it came to the puppetry, the actual Gremlins themselves, and it's not. It is a studio whose work I actually am completely unfamiliar with because I looked it up earlier. I can't remember the name of it now, so I'm not entirely sure why I bothered to look up earlier because I didn't even make a mental note of it. But it's like really fantastic work, and I think, and we all know how reliable IMDb trivia is, but a couple of weeks ago when I looked at this last, the whole thing of the rules around not feeding them after midnight and the reversion to bright light, was predicated around the fact that they weren't sold on the puppetry effects, and so it was going to be more convenient to keep them largely shrouded in darkness, which works absolutely. And yeah, like the puppetry, the Gremlins themselves, the life force for good or bad therein is absolutely the trump card in this film. Like the anarchic joy of their behaviour is absolutely the reason to watch this film. I'm just not entirely sure what the point of it is.
Does it have to have a point? It's just entertaining.
Exactly. I think there's. Do you know what? Looking at it now, there's a message there in America wrestling with what made in America means anymore, because I think this is at the point at which the consumer market in America was concerned about not Chinese imports at that point, but certainly Eastern Japanese specifically imports, I think largely perhaps in the automotive market and the sort of the snowballing influence of Toyota probably amongst others in the automotive industry, on which America had for so long pegged so many of its or so much of its pride. But if that ends up being little mental green creatures babbling nonsense and shooting pensioners out of top floor windows on chairlifts, then cool. It's good. I'm not in love with Gremlins anymore, but I don't want anyone to get the impression that I'm saying if you haven't seen it before, don't watch it. I'm just
No, I am, and you're talking about the themes and things there. I certainly read a lot about like the themes of like anti-capitalist and like, it's like the sort of industrial legacy you're talking about there, Craig. And I can see bits in there, but I don't think they're there particularly strongly, and I don't actually care. I'm just watching these wee things cause mayhem and loving it.
Yeah.
Glad you mentioned the puppetry. I had been going to, and I'd forgotten I was going to come back to it. But some of the effects, some of the stop motion doesn't look great, but the puppetry stands up so well. It looks so good.
100%.
And it's 100%. What the whole film's about, and the sequel, but the puppetry is so good. One last thing I want to mention too, because I want to bag on Chris Columbus, because Chris Columbus, he directed Home Alone films, which I think are actually all right, but he didn't write them. Maybe that helps. Yes. He wrote this, and those are the only two things of his that are tolerable, because he also wrote, if you recall, The Goonies, which is the worst of things. Which is 90% shouting. Intolerable nonsense, that film. That's got nothing to do with Gremlins. I just wanted to bag on The Goonies and Chris Columbus, as we've done in a previous episode, because, well, I hadn't got it out of my system yet.
Chris Columbus, journeyman, safe pair of hands. I'm not going to rag on him for that. Would I like Chris Columbus's career? Yeah. Yeah, no, I wouldn't want people to get the impression that it's not that I don't enjoy Gremlins. If you said to me, look, and Ghostbusters was massively formative for me. It was my first trip to a cinema ever, and
mine was my second. But yeah,
I probably have to question my parents' judgment on that, because I would have been 5, and I don't know that I want to show Ghostbusters to my son, who's 5. Different times, listeners, different times. But yeah, Ghostbusters was the top of the box office this year, if I recall correctly. And I would say to you now that if you're going to watch either Ghostbusters or Gremlins, watch Gremlins, because it's a great deal of fun. And the anarchic element of Gremlins, I don't think will ever tire. It's just the rest of the framework around it is kind of perfunctory to a point where I find it difficult to recommend. But yeah, that's Gremlins, man.